Jocelyn Marlowe sat in the third row of Clearwater Middle in Boise, Idaho, with eyes fixated on the glowing equation at the front of the room. At 12 years old, she was a bright spark in an environment that too often brushed aside her talent. That fateful day, when her hand shot up confidently to tackle a problem Mr. Redford had deemed impossible, the classroom erupted with dismissive laughter and sneers. Mr. Redford, a tall, grey-haired man with perpetually rolled-up sleeves and a smirk that masked his true disdain, had long used his position to belittle students like Jocelyn. Even in that moment of quiet defiance, when she met his gaze with unyielding determination, the underlying racism was palpable. In a class where she was one of only 3 black students and the sole member of an honors math course, Jocelyn had long suffered the weight of low expectations, expected to be the good girl who would quietly endure and disappear into the background. Yet, that afternoon ignited a burning need for retribution inside her. As her teacher waved off her silent challenge and the classroom returned to its mundane rhythm, Jocelyn's heart pounded with the promise of a storm. When dismissed for the day, she did not leave with a heavy sigh of defeat. Instead, she stepped out into the cool Boise afternoon with a two-plate walk that seemed to stretch into a metaphor for the long road of injustice she had to travel. Every step past the crooked gas station and the laundromat reeking of burnt dryer sheets echoed with memories of a lifetime of being underestimated and ridiculed purely because of the color of her skin. At home, amid the comforting, savory aromas of her mother Denise preparing dinner, Jocelyn laid out the infamous sheet of paper that Mr. Redford had carelessly passed her, a challenge wrapped in venomous disbelief. As her pencil tapped away in the kitchen, while her mother encouraged her with warm words and gentle kisses on her head, Jocelyn's mind became a battleground of equations and long-held frustrations. By the time midnight crept over her quiet house, the sheets of scratch paper and trial attempts lay scattered like fragments of her suppressed anger, until finally, in one moment of brilliant clarity, a connection emerged. A solution that not only solved the impossibility of the problem, but also symbolized her inner power. This was not merely a mathematical triumph. It was a declaration that she would not be silenced by a system steeped in prejudice. Jocelyn's victory was the spark to set ablaze a fire of righteous retribution. On Monday, when she strode back into that classroom, clutching 2 perfectly transcribed folders, one bearing the original, raw, heartfelt labor of determination, and the other a clean, meticulously detailed version, she carried with her the evidence of her genius and her undeniable right to respect. Mr. Redford's eyes widened in a mix of shock and indignation, his smug facade beginning to crumble as whispers of fairness and retribution swept through the room. In that charged atmosphere, the balance of power shifted. The dark legacy of discrimination was met head-on with a brilliance that was both beautiful and unforgiving. And though the bittersweet pain of a lifetime of prejudice still weighed on her, Jocelyn Marlowe stood as a proud beacon of justice, leaving everyone, especially those who had once laughed, to marvel and perhaps rethink the true cost of underestimating a determined heart. Jocelyn Marlowe sat at the table that Sunday evening with a slice of apple pie in front of her, while her mother Denise busied herself outside trimming the shrubs. Her little sister Zoe was busy drawing smiley faces with chalk on the cracked sidewalk, as if life were continuing normally despite the uproar inside her heart. But everything had shifted for Jocelyn. Earlier that day, when her teacher dismissed her incredible achievement as nothing more than a fleeting challenge, the echoes of that humiliation still reverberated in her mind. The memory of Mr. Redford shrugging off her gift, his eyes filled with condescension as he passed by her work, haunted her. In her head, the injustice burned hotter than the late summer sun, fueling a deep need for acknowledgement and a plea for a reckoning long overdue. As she stared out the window at the ordinary neighborhood scene, her mind was far away, replaying every slight, every dismissive word that Mr. Redford had uttered. That evening, Denise called her into the warm, fragrant kitchen where the aroma of home-baked apple pie mingled with the spicy tang of seasoned chicken from the stove. Denise gently prodded, asking if Jocelyn truly wanted to take her work to Mr. Redford on Monday. Jocelyn hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty as her fork hovered halfway to her mouth. Her mother's soft voice carried a tone of both caution and firm encouragement. Denise explained that men like Mr. Redford carried a lifetime of blind spots, rooted in deep-set prejudice that made them unable to see the brilliance that shone in the face of someone like Jocelyn. Denise told her that Jocelyn's light was too strong to be dimmed by his cruelty, and that by sharing her work, she was not trying to prove anything to anyone else, but to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Even if Mr. Redford never admitted his mistake, showing him the undeniable truth might force him to confront his own shortcomings. That night, Jocelyn packed her backpack slowly and deliberately, placing the clean folder with her meticulously solved problems into a protective plastic sleeve. As she chose her clothes for the day, she did it with the precision of someone who had prepared for a momentous occasion rather than simply another Monday at Clearwater Middle School. Although a part of her craved public vindication, she was not consumed by a thirst for revenge. She simply longed to be heard. When Monday morning finally arrived, she was up early, her breakfast minimal and her steps measured as she tied her shoes tight. The sky was overcast and dry as she walked the familiar 2-block distance to school, gripping her backpack strap as if it were a lifeline through the turbulent sea of her emotions. Inside the school building, the hallways buzzed with the usual clamor of lockers slamming and exuberant chatter. Jocelyn hardly noticed the raucous energy as she made her way to room 206. The bell rang precisely as she slipped into her seat and tucked away her folder, her heart pounding in her ears like the distant roll of thunder before a storm. In the classroom, Mr. Redford was already scribbling equations on the board, his back turned to the door as though shielding himself from the very truth he had denied. Jocelyn kept her head down at first, silently waiting for the right moment, her folder hidden and her resolve slowly gathering strength. It was not long into third period that an unexpected shift occurred. While Mr. Redford launched into a rapid-fire lesson filled with half-solved examples and incomprehensible formulas, a hand shot up, not from Jocelyn, but from Joshua Levine, the class clown who usually turned everything into a joke. But today his voice wavered with genuine curiosity as he asked Mr. Redford if they could revisit the infamous problem from last week. The classroom fell silent as Mr. Redford paused with his marker mid-air. A murmur rippled across the room as Joshua reiterated his question about the so-called impossible problem that Mr. Redford had dismissed with arrogant certainty. A couple of students snickered quietly, while others exchanged uneasy glances. But that was when Jocelyn felt the weight of every hopeful gaze on her. For a long moment, she remained seated, hand resting near the folder. The silence in the room was broken only by Mr. Redford's mocking laughter as he dismissed the idea with a careless remark about how, if someone managed to solve it, they would be even smarter than him. At that moment, the tension built inside Jocelyn until it could no longer be contained. Slowly, with deliberate grace, she reached into her backpack and pulled out the folder that she had spent countless hours perfecting. With her hands steady and her eyes blazing with quiet determination, she raised her hand high, this time with command and confidence. Mr. Redford hesitated as their eyes met. The heavy air in the room spoke volumes even before Jocelyn stepped forward. With a resolute calm, she walked to the front of the class, carrying her folder as if it were a banner of truth. There were no whispers or giggles. In that charged moment, silence fell over the room like a velvet curtain before the unveiling of a dramatic revelation. Jocelyn gently laid her papers on the teacher's desk and picked up a clean black marker. Without hesitation, she erased the fresh, trivial problem from the board and began to rewrite the original defiant equation that Mr. Redford had once claimed was unsolvable. Her voice emerged soft but persistent as she explained the first method, her clear words cutting through the doubt that had plagued the room. Every step she meticulously recounted was infused with the quiet power of one who had been underestimated for far too long. The numbers and operations, usually cold and lifeless, seemed to dance on the board as she methodically boxed the final answer before turning to reveal a second, even more elegant solution. When she finished, she capped her marker and returned to her seat, while a hush fell over the class. For a heartbeat, not a single voice dared to disrupt the profound silence that now defined the room. After a long moment, Joshua, the ever-joking student, broke the silence with an awed murmur, followed by scattered claps of genuine admiration. A few hesitant voices filled the air, praising her brilliance and daring to whisper that she had truly outshined Mr. Redford that day. The proud smile on Denise's face when she later saw her daughter walk calmly into the corridor was a silent testament to years of hidden struggle and quiet perseverance. Yet, behind the veil of respect, there was also a burning tension, as Mr. Redford's face transformed from smug arrogance to cold, seething indignation. When he finally stepped forward to examine her work, his eyes flickered with something akin to reluctant admiration before his voice came out low and bitter as he muttered that he had been wrong. Jocelyn's eyes met his for the first time since that painful Friday, and the look in her gaze said more than words ever could. It was a stare that sealed the fate of every dismissive laugh, every racist slight, and every moment when her intelligence had been belittled. Even as the bell rang and the class slowly began to stir, the air was thick with the unspoken promise of justice long overdue. Outside in the bustling hallways, as footsteps echoed off lockers and voices mingled, Jocelyn felt a profound change within herself. She was not standing in the crowd as the quiet, shrinking girl she once was. Now every step exuded confidence and the strength to claim her rightful place, even if it meant shaking the very foundations of the prejudiced system around her. As she rounded the corner toward her locker, a familiar, almost too friendly voice called out her name. Camille Dorsey, known for her popularity and loud personality, jogged over with a mixture of awe and envy. Camille asked if it was true that Jocelyn had solved the infamous problem, her tone light yet incredulous. Jocelyn's quiet affirmation was met with Camille's gleeful laughter and a remark about how Mr. Redford had been forced to confront his own hypocrisy. The exchange, while seemingly casual, was laden with meaning. It was a public acknowledgement of the power dynamic that had been so long taken for granted, and it was a signal to everyone that nothing would ever be the same again. Later that day at lunch, as Jocelyn sat at her regular table munching on a sandwich, the dignified Principal Marcia Linwood appeared and beckoned her with a respectful yet serious tone. Taken aside into the front office, where the assistant principal and Mr. Patel, the school counselor, awaited her, Jocelyn felt the weight of the moment. Principal Linwood congratulated her for her astounding work and revealed that Mr. Redford had shared her methods with the administration. Mr. Patel, leaning forward with genuine enthusiasm, informed her that she had been nominated for the Regional Maths Showcase scheduled next month in Spokane, a prestigious event for the top middle school minds from around the region. Jocelyn blinked with a mix of disbelief and cautious hope as she realized that her work had transcended the bounds of the classroom and was now touching the wider world. This moment, filled with both vindication and the heavy scars of past mistreatment, was not merely a personal triumph, but also a symbolic turning point in the relentless battle against a system steeped in racial prejudice and cruelty. Jocelyn Marlowe knew that her journey was far from over. While the sweetness of success mingled with the bitter taste of years of neglect and humiliation, today marked the beginning of a long overdue reckoning, a decisive moment when the scales of justice finally tip in favor of those who have been trampled on for too long. The proud yet somber reflections of her supportive mother, the cautious admiration of her classmates, and the hallowed corridors of Clearwater Middle all bore witness to the transformation of a once silenced girl into a determined force ready to rewrite the narrative of her life. And so, with her head held high and her unyielding determination as fierce as ever, Jocelyn stepped forward into a future where her brilliance would no longer be hidden or diminished by the shadows of discrimination, but celebrated with the honor it had long deserved. Jocelyn Marlowe's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. After that fateful demonstration in math class, when she had boldly solved the so-called impossible problem, she found herself thrust into a whirlwind of unexpected attention and opportunity. One crisp afternoon, as the late spring sun danced through the leafy oaks outside Clearwater Middle School, Jocelyn's counselor informed her that the school's administration believed she could represent their humble institution at the Regional Maths Showcase in Spokane. The words hung in the air like a challenge, not just to prove her own brilliance, but to demand that everyone see what they had long failed to acknowledge. Her stomach did a slow turn, and though she had craved nothing more than to expose Mr. Redford's condescending cruelty, She now realized that her achievement was bigger than that one defiant moment. It was a spotlight on the persistent injustice that had dogged her since she first walked into a classroom that never quite made room for a bright, determined black girl. At first, the idea of leaving everything familiar behind, her quiet routines, her predictable 2-block walk to school, and the ever-watchful eyes of peers who had spent years laughing at her expense, filled her with both excitement and uncertainty. As she trudged back to the cafeteria that day, each step felt lighter than the last, even though her legs trembled with a cocktail of anticipation and fear. What would happen now that she was visible? Could she truly overcome the legacy of a teacher who had dismissed her and the sneering, dismissive glances of classmates who had long taken her for granted? Even as her peers began whispering about her newfound accolades, Jocelyn's heart ached with the memory of every moment of prejudice, each cutting remark born from centuries-old biases that reared their ugly heads in the halls of Clearwater. During language arts class that very afternoon, her teacher, Miss Barlow, paused mid-lesson to remark in a gentle, almost conspiratorial tone that she had heard about what Jocelyn had accomplished in math class. "Jocelyn, I heard what you did," Miss Barlow said quietly, her words filled with genuine admiration. The room fell silent, eyes turning toward her in a mixture of astonishment and a lingering, begrudging respect. Jocelyn only offered a faint nod in reply, the weight of her recent trial still heavy on her shoulders. When the final bell rang and she stepped out into the cool evening, her mother Denise waited in the car with a look that conveyed both relief and pride. "How'd it go?" Denise asked as she buckled Jocelyn into the seat. Without a word, Jocelyn handed her the colorful showcase flyer. "They want me to go to Spokane next month," she murmured softly. Denise's eyes scanned the flyer slowly before she spoke, her voice a mix of incredulity and encouragement. "You serious?" Jocelyn nodded, and her mum started the engine as if setting a course toward destiny. That night, as Jocelyn sat at her kitchen table with a hot cup of chamomile tea in front of her, the gravity of her new reality sank in. All she had ever wanted was to prove Mr. Redford wrong, to show him that his dismissive attitude and vile racial biases were not a final verdict on her capabilities. Instead, she now faced a world that was beginning to notice her brilliance, and that meant she would have to confront more than just a single math problem. The long hours she'd spent poring over equations and scribbling her solutions into neat, tidy pages were not merely a victory over an academic challenge. They were a cry for recognition, a demand that the closed minds of people like Mr. Redford and others who had long underestimated her finally see her for who she truly was. The following morning in room 206 was different from every other day she had known. Jocelyn walked into class with measured steps, her hands gripping her backpack a little more tightly, as if holding on to both the past and the promise of change. The hallways, usually filled with loud laughter and the clamor of lockers slamming, now seemed to murmur with subtle shifts in attitude. Every whisper, every sideways glance from classmates who had once ignored or mocked her carried a note of curiosity and, perhaps, faintly, of respect. When Mr. Redford strode into the classroom, his entrance as abrupt and imperious as always, he did nothing to acknowledge the tidal wave of changes that had swept through his domain. His tone remained clipped, his eyes cold and unyielding as he embarked on another lesson, as if Friday's defiant revelation had been nothing more than an anomaly. Yet, beneath his monotony, Jocelyn sensed the struggle of a man unwilling to admit fault. In a hushed voice, over the sound of scratching pens and the rustle of paper, Mr. Redford handed out a worksheet as if nothing ever happened, neglecting to mention the brilliant solution that had sent shockwaves through the classroom just days before. The silence in the room was palpable, and as Jocelyn worked through the problems with mechanical precision, her mind wandered to darker thoughts. The sting of that teacher's dismissive, "You're very bright, but just be careful. Some kids don't take well to being shown up." Those words, spoken in a tone that barely concealed his bitterness, replayed in her head like a grim reminder that she was still a target. After class, when the hallways emptied and the familiar roar of adolescent chatter dwindled to a murmur, Jocelyn remained behind, clutching the folder that contained her revolutionary work. She approached Mr. Redford's desk, with the hope of garnering some form of acknowledgement. "These are the original pages from the weekend," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. With a dismissive grunt, Mr. Redford barely glanced at the top sheet before remarking, "Thanks, I already showed the copies to the principal." His words were so flat and perfunctory that they cut deeper than any insult could. He gave no further praise, no hint of validation, only a curt nod and a stacking of papers, as if he wished to erase the moment from his memory entirely. Walking out of the classroom, Jocelyn felt a bitter cocktail of triumph and disappointment. Outside, in the echoing corridors of Clearwater Middle, Mr. Patel, the ever-supportive counselor, summoned her again. In the quiet of his office, he confirmed that her registration for the Spokane event had been processed. "This isn't just about one problem," he said earnestly, leaning forward to make sure she understood. "It's about how you think, how you reason. That's something you cannot fake." The sincerity in his tone made Jocelyn's heart swell with both hope and an undercurrent of rage. Here was a man who recognized that her intellectual fire was a rare gift, a beacon that, if nurtured properly, could shatter the chains of prejudice once and for all. Later that evening at home, as Jocelyn sat at the kitchen table once more, her mother Denise returned with steaming mugs of tea. The conversation that unfolded was gentle and reflective. Denise said quietly, "Some folks are more comfortable doubting you than admitting they misjudged you." Her words, tender yet resolute, resonated with Jocelyn. She had not only solved an unsolvable math problem, she had forced a room full of doubters to confront their ignorance. She had reminded them that brilliance cannot be snuffed out by a dismissive gesture or an arrogant sneer. The days that followed witnessed a slow but inexorable transformation within Jocelyn. In the cafeteria, where once empty seats near the front were reserved for the popular and the loud, classmates now slid over to offer her space. Yet she chose her usual spot at the back, a modest corner near a faded mural of towering American mountains, a silent nod to the enduring spirit of those who persevere against all odds. Even as friends like Josh casually dropped by with remarks laced with incredulity and admiration, Jocelyn kept her composure. Josh, half eating an apple and wide-eyed with wonder, even admitted, "You smoked that problem twice," as if to underline the magnitude of her silent, steady rebellion. During a quiet study hall, Jocelyn began filling an open notebook with reflections and questions, a heartfelt meditation on what it meant to be brilliant in a world that had long underestimated her. She questioned why confidence in someone so misunderstood could be mistaken for arrogance, and pondered the true essence of being smart, a quality that, even if unseen by the narrow-minded, had to be known internally. Miss Barlow later joined her and gently reminded her that she had, in fact, taught everyone in that classroom more than mere academic lessons. She had taught them about the courage to stand tall when the odds are stacked against you. In the final days before her departure for Spokane, Jocelyn's inner strength burgeoned into a bold acceptance of herself. Passing by room 206 on her last day, she caught a glimpse of Mr. Redford grading papers with a neutral expression. Though she longed to confront him one final time, her resolve was unshakable. She no longer needed his validation to believe in her potential. That very weekend, her mother took her shopping for a new winter jacket to brave the icy winds of a Spokane February. On clearance, they found a navy blue jacket with a soft lining that fit her like a second skin, a tangible reminder that she was now prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. With Denise's whispered words of reassurance, "You ready?" and Jocelyn's quiet nod, she packed her essentials, including that folder that had become a symbol of her triumph. As she boarded the bus the next morning, coat zipped up and her heart pounding with a fierce blend of determination and hope, Jocelyn Marlowe stepped forward into a future that promised not only academic accolades, but also a long overdue reckoning for every dismissive word and every slight born of prejudice. Her journey was far from over, but with every measured step, she was determined to transform the bitter taste of discrimination into a legacy of empowerment, leaving behind a trail of astonishment and inspiration that would make even the most hardened skeptics pause and take notice. Jocelyn Marlowe sat quietly on the cold metal bench at the bus stop, feeling the weight of years of struggle and quiet determination pressing against her shoulders. It was a brisk February morning, the kind where the chill in the air reminded you that life's challenges might be harsh, but they also sharpen your resolve. As she stepped onto the bus, its engine rumbled like the opening chords of a long-awaited symphony, and in that moment she reached into her well-worn backpack to pull out a small, neatly folded note that her loving mother, Denise, had pressed into her hand earlier that morning. The note simply read, "Whatever room you walk into, walk like you belong, because you do." Those words, humble yet powerful, were a promise of validation and respect that Jocelyn had yearned for since childhood. A stark counterpoint to the dismissive sneers and hurtful comments she had endured over the years from those who believed her brilliance was out of place simply because of the color of her skin. Folding the note back up with deliberate care and tucking it into her math folder, which had become a repository not just for solutions to impossible problems, but for every drop of sweat, frustration, and eventual triumph, Jocelyn watched as the bus pulled away from the curb. Looking out the window, her eyes wandered over the familiar view of her neighborhood. She did not do so in order to linger on what she was leaving behind, but to imagine what she might build next. For too long, society had relegated brilliant young minds like hers to the shadows of prejudice and low expectations. Every child, she believed passionately, deserved to be seen for who they truly were, and not judged by narrow assumptions about what they should be. That vision kept her heart warm, even on the chilliest of days. As the bus rolled steadily on its route towards Spokane, Jocelyn felt a stirring of hope mixed with the fierce determination to never again allow someone like Mr. Redford, or anyone else who devalued her worth based on racial prejudices, to hold her down. Her journey was not merely about attending a regional math showcase, although that in itself was a victory that many would celebrate. It was about sending a clear message to everyone who had ever doubted her, that her brilliance, her resolve, and her unique perspective were her own, untouchable by the narrow confines of others' ignorance. Every mile the bus covered echoed with the promise of transformation. Jocelyn looked out at the passing scenery, sprawling suburban neighborhoods, winding roads dotted with roadside attractions and half-timbered American homes, and she imagined the future she might help build, a future where every child of color was not only seen but celebrated, where the discriminatory remarks of the past were replaced by a collective recognition of talent, determination, and heart. In that vision, every step forward was a defiant march against a system that had taken centuries to reform, a system that now, in the light of her success, had little choice but to evolve. The engine's hum, the gentle sway of the bus, and the soft tap of rain beginning to fall outside worked together in a quiet symphony that accompanied her thoughts. Jocelyn's heart swelled with the conviction that the world was finally ready for a reckoning where the scales of justice would tip so dramatically in favor of the underdog that even the most hardened skeptics would be forced to take notice. Her successes in the classroom had been both a quiet act of rebellion and a resounding declaration of independence from a system that had so often tried to diminish her light. As she sat there, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee from a thermos, a little treat she allowed herself for moments just like this, Jocelyn felt the burden of past injustices begin to lift. She thought about the countless times she had been told to know her place, and how that cruel command had only hardened her resolve to break free and build something extraordinary. Today, her presence on that bus was a statement in itself. It was a message to every teacher, every school administrator, every peer, and every stranger who doubted the capacity of a young black girl to not only achieve academic excellence, but to redefine what was possible in the face of relentless adversity. By the time the bus neared its destination, the words from that simple note had turned into a powerful mantra pulsing through her veins. Walk like you belong, because you do. With every fiber of her being, Jocelyn Marlowe knew that the next chapter of her journey was not just about competing in a showcase or even about excelling in math. It was about transforming the narrative of an entire generation, challenging the status quo with the quiet, unyielding strength of a heart that refused to be silenced. As the bus finally slowed and came to a stop, Jocelyn gathered her belongings, her math folder snug against her chest. She looked out the window one last time, not with a sense of longing for what she was leaving behind, but with a spark of anticipation for what she was about to build. a future where every child, regardless of who they were assumed to be, could claim their worth with pride and grace. And as she stepped off the bus, the crisp air and the wide-open expanse of the American landscape welcoming her into a world of endless opportunities, Jocelyn Marlowe carried with her the unshakable conviction that her presence, her success, and her resistance were not only a vindication of her hard-fought battles, but a beacon of hope that would light the way for generations to come. If you know someone like Jocelyn, believe in them even before they have to prove their worth. And if you are someone like Jocelyn, never wait for the world to validate you. Walk into every room as though you truly belong, because you do, and in doing so teach others to see you for the brilliant, resilient soul you are.